have you ever designed and developed products for users who are very different from you? Well, today we're going to go over some tips and strategies to deeply understand your user and to create effective products for them at speed using immersive design sprints. I'm Sumier Phalake. I'm a design lead at Google Station. And Google Station is a product that's building high-quality public Wi-Fi for users in next billion user markets.
And I'm Burgan. I'm a designer on the Chrome team focusing on our next billion users. All right, let's jump right in and talk about, there we go, what is a design sprint? So we'll do a brief recap of design sprints. So we define a design sprint as a framework for answering critical business questions through design, prototyping, and testing our ideas with users to generate actionable feedback and insights. Now, design sprints were created at Google, and they have evolved over time. They're a mix of methods from design thinking, business strategy, psychology, and user research that were all selected and ordered specifically to support divergent and convergent thinking and to drive towards a targeted outcome. So what's different about a design sprint is that we set clear goals and deliverables up front. We time box all of the activities so that we not only speed up the learning and development process, but we also drive the right behaviors from our users. And then finally, we enable a wide range of disciplines and stakeholders to participate in the design and development process. Now, design is not an individual sport, and design sprints are a highly collaborative process. We want to be able to include multiple perspectives and points of views, and to that end, we leverage sprints to include all participants' voices. Now, the design sprint is a highly flexible framework, and you'll want to flex it and adapt it to your particular challenge or scenario. One of the advantages of the sprint is you can reduce the risks of downstream mistakes by getting to insights that lead to a better understanding of your user and your problem space quicker. So today we're going to talk about a way that we have flexed the design sprint to really get a better understanding of users that are very different from ourselves. Through immersion, intercepts, and co-creation, we're bringing actual users instead of representatives of those users into the center of the design and development process. Now, there's a phenomenon known as the co-creation effect, and it shows that when organizations and consumers create something together, both parties are more invested in the outcome. So what does this look like in practice? We're going to start by bringing a team together of very different disciplines, including UX, Eng, PM, to create a powerful team. We're looking for a good representation of roles and skills. And this is going to allow us to dramatically reduce the amount of time that we spend communicating and increase the number of viable ideas that we generate. So once we have our team together, we're going to walk through the 5 sprint phases: understand, sketch, decide, prototype, and validate. Now, we have a mix of structured individual work and planned group discussions that support a clear diverge and converge process that will guide the team to get on the same page around the artifacts that it's going to produce to test with users. Now, the ideal design sprint is going to provide time for team members to reflect on the challenge and also opportunities to validate or disrupt those ideas. So the goal for the first phase, the understand phase, is to gather all of the relevant data and information at hand. We really want to create a shared brain and align around a new world together and a new understanding of the problem space. Then we're going to move on to the sketch phase, and this is when we're going to generate tons and tons of ideas, tons of potential solutions, and we're going to use a couple of exercises that are designed to get the ideas out of your participants' head onto paper and to really push them to go beyond their first idea to get better and more innovative ideas. Now, once we have all of these ideas, we're in the middle of the sprint, we have tons and tons of solutions, it's time to start narrowing down and making hard choices. So the decide phase is all about those hard decisions and selecting what you're going to prototype with users. Once you've narrowed down, you want to create a prototype that you can test your hypothesis and validate or invalidate your assumptions. Because you only have a really short amount of time, maybe you have a couple hours, maybe you have a day to build that prototype, it should only be as high fidelity as needed to answer your questions and nothing more. Finally, we're going to validate. The goal of the test phase is to confirm that the product that you've prototyped is good, and also that you prototyped the right thing. So today we're going to discuss 2 case studies to show you how we've used this framework to give users the tool to engage in the ideation and creation process. And now that you understand the structure of a sprint, when's the right time to sprint? Really, you can sprint at any point in the life cycle of your product. You might be at the very beginning and want to use a sprint for visioning or creating a roadmap. You may have a mature product and you're thinking about adding a specific feature. Whatever point in the life cycle of your product that you run a sprint, it's important to remember that involving users early and often can really help validate the problem space and create better ideas. And there are a couple of outcomes from a sprint. So I like to say that there's never a failed sprint because you always learn something. But we have defined 3 potential outcomes, and the first is an efficient failure. So it can be a little dispiriting that something didn't work, but it's really useful to know, and you've saved all of that time, money, and resources that you might have spent building out the product and then learning that it didn't work. So you've learned quickly. Now, most sprints fit in this middle bucket, what we called flawed success. Some things worked, some things didn't, but you have a path forward. You know what you need to do next. And sometimes you have an epic win. Maybe you have a couple things you want to tweak, but you're ready to move to production. You'll need to set your expectations with stakeholders at the beginning of the sprint so that everyone is aware of this and they know what the outcomes might be. Now, let's talk a little bit about immersion.
Great. So, really comprehensive recap of a very complex topic there. And the reason that we rushed through that is because we're assuming that if you're here, then you've heard of a design sprint before. You have most likely taken part in a design sprint before, and maybe some of you have even run your own design sprints. So we're going to jump right into immersion. Now, before we talk about immersive sprints, let's try to understand what immersion actually means. So to think about immersion, I went to Google and I looked up the dictionary, and here's a definition of the term immersion. Immersion is instruction based on extensive exposure to surroundings or conditions that are native or pertinent to the object of study. Now, this is a lot to take in, so I kept Googling. Here's another definition, much simpler. Immersion is a deep mental involvement. Here's a third one. Immersion is a state of being deeply engaged or involved, absorption. All right, so there's some common themes emerging from all of these definitions. Let's bring this back to UX. How can immersion guide your interaction with users, especially users that you don't know very well? I like to think of it in terms of 3 steps. Step 1, immersion is about awareness. So first, doing the background research and study that it actually takes before you go into a new environment and users. Then bringing those learnings with you into these new surroundings so that they can provide you the context that you need to process that correctly. And then when you're in this new environment, just being very keenly aware, observing without preconceived notions or bias or judgment. So that's awareness. Step 2, immersion is about listening. So you're going to hear a lot of new sounds, process a lot of new sites. You're going to talk to a lot of users that you haven't interacted with before. And these users are going to tell you about their lives, about their problems that you haven't faced before. So it's really important to listen attentively. And this is actually pretty hard to do. If you try it yourself right now, when you try to listen to someone speaking it's very easy to let your mind wander and think about what you want to say next. It's very hard to mindfully listen. I hope that's not what you all are doing right now, by the way. But it's really important to listen attentively. So that's step 2. And then step 3 is taking awareness and taking listening and bringing it to empathy. And this is when you're actually stepping into someone's shoes and experiencing what they experience, understanding their needs, their pain points, their hopes and dreams, and even things that delight them. So when you have awareness, listening, empathy, all of these 3 things together, that's when we consider it immersion. So how does this relate to design sprints and design? Now, when you're in a design sprint, you're making a call and you're designing solutions for users based on what you think is going to work well for them. Now, where does this come from? It comes from intuition, right? And how does intuition get built? It comes from a lifetime of experience. It comes from knowledge and study. It comes from trial and error, like launching a lot of designs and seeing what works and learning from success, learning from failure. It's a constant loop of learning and tweaking. But when you're designing for users that you've never interacted with before, you don't have this intuition. So what happens in the context of a sprint? All of this gets amplified. In a sprint, you're time-boxed, so you're doing things really fast. It's a high-pressure situation. It's not just you, but probably you and a bunch of sprinters who are all in the same boat as you. You don't understand your user really well. So Burgan and I are often placed in situations like this because we both work on products where we're distant from our users. We don't understand our users very well that often. So what happens? We've seen that in sprints like this, there is analysis paralysis because your sprinters are not confident about deciding how to move forward with your design. You end up making safe choices. So your design solutions are not strong. Sprint outcomes suffer. You just don't see that big leap that you want to see at the end of a sprint. So we need to help you and your sprinters build intuition. How do we do this? So we think Immersion is a great solution to doing this. Good design in sprints is about making educated and informed decisions about how to solve a problem that your users are facing. So with Immersion, you're helping your sprinters gain the foundation to confidently design solutions. So let's bring it all together. Immersive sprints create a realistic environment to guide your sprinters, drive great outcomes, and then validate sprint outcomes. If you don't understand your users really well, and you want to design solutions for them in a fast-paced sprint environment, then Immersion is a great technique to set you up for success. So how do we do this? We're going to go over a few techniques today. First, we're going to talk about doing pre- and post-sprint research, so actually incorporating research as part of your sprint. Then, creating immersion during the design sprint itself. Third, participatory design sprint. So this is when you're co-designing with your users. You actually ask your users to come to the sprint with you and take part in it as a sprinter. And then last, instead of saving validation for the last stage, incorporate validation at every stage of the sprint. Make sure that you check in with your users at the end of each day so that you know you're on the right path. So to give you an understanding of how all of this works in practice, we're going to walk through 2 case studies of successful sprints that both Burgan and I have run. So first, I'm going to hand it off to Burgan to talk about a really interesting sprint she ran in Kenya.
All right, I'm excited to tell you guys about a sprint I ran with an app called AfriScout. Now, we were kicking off this app to help herders survive ongoing drought. Now, pastoralists are nomadic or semi-nomadic people who move their livestock between pastures depending on the season. And now with the emergence of climate change, rainfall patterns have shifted, forcing herders to find new routes, new pastures, and new sources of water. And their traditional methods of finding good grazing lands, like word of mouth, scouting, ancestral knowledge, have proven insufficient to maintain healthy herds in this changing landscape. An organization called Project Concern International, a nonprofit based in San Diego and a Google.org grantee, created a program that relayed satellite data to pastoralists that showed current vegetative conditions. Now, this gave the pastoralists critical intelligence about where to move their herds. The proof of concept was highly successful. We saw 50% reduction in herd mortality and an 80% adoption rate in the local populations that it was tested with. But the delivery system was cumbersome and inefficient. The maps were auto-emailed to the PCI field staff, who would print them out, deliver them to district livestock officers, who would then pass them on to the locals. So this process was slow and difficult to scale. So our question was, would it be possible for us to cut out those middlemen and simply deliver the maps from the satellite straight to smartphones? As we planned the sprint, we recognized the difficulty in properly understanding the cultural, societal, and usage scenarios encountered by populations so different from ourselves. But we knew that the community, as experts of their own experience, would have the historical context and the knowledge of what was and wasn't important to the community. So rather than just consult the community, we decided to involve it. Now, as designers and developers, we often create products for people. Co-design is the act of creating with stakeholders and users, ensuring that the people most affected by the solutions are part of the development process. And this is really based on the idea and the belief that all people are creative. Now, the design sprint gives us a framework to put this into practice. And through the sprint process, we can guide users through the ideation and creation process to really give voice to their ideas. As you can imagine, we had a lot of different perspectives around this challenge. So we had to build the right sprint team. And we had quite a large team with a number of diverse stakeholders. We had our geographic information systems specialist, who was our mapping specialist. We had local developers and a UX researcher from iHub, which is an incubation space in Nairobi. We had 2 staffers from PCI in San Diego, and we had UX designers from Google. But most importantly, we had 2 pastoralists from different districts in Tanzania. And then we had 3 PCI field staff from Ethiopia and Tanzania who worked directly with the pastoralists and had been part of this proof of concept program. So it was important to us that this app transcended geographic and tribal boundaries. Now, this team required the integration of experts and users really working closely together. So empathy between our participants was essential, and face-to-face communication was best. So we all gathered in iHub's office in Nairobi. Now, co-creation can be applied at any stage of the design development process through different activities. And as we created the schedule, we thought deeply about how to include our users at each stage of this process. And by incorporating user feedback throughout this process, we can avoid the anchoring effect, where we're really going to really see that human tendency to rely on that first piece of information to make subsequent judgments. So during the understand phase, our users helped us understand the problem space through lightning talks and documenting and sharing how might we's. Now you can see some of the topics that we discussed were technical infrastructure, offline experience, battery life, traditional decision making. So it was really important to users that these maps worked offline. They were not always connected. And traditional decision making was something I don't think we would have talked about if we had run this sprint in San Diego or here in Mountain View. It really is something that we learned the elders make a lot of the decisions around where to move the herds, but the younger generation are the one with the smartphone. So we had to take those types of things into consideration as we considered the design. So to make the pastoralist experience resonate with all of the sprint team members, we broke into groups and created user journey maps. These were really important because people are good at thinking in terms of stories about people and the things that they do and what happens to them. And stories can be useful in generative design to invoke empathy and imagination and trigger ideas for a more ideal future. We used Crazy 8 to allow the team to generate a ton of different ideas based on everything we learned in the understand phase. And to help our users with this activity, we really gave some structure to it by giving them prompts to sketch around. So we did this in 4 phases. And during the decide phase, we really gave our users more power in the decision-making process with extra votes. And we reminded our other participants to evaluate each idea, considering what our audience experienced and what they wanted. So depending on the level of the fidelity that you're aiming for, one of the most difficult phases to incorporate users in can be the prototyping phase. Paper prototypes might be the most inclusive way, and those are totally OK. We were aiming for a little bit higher fidelity, and so we considered letting our users go during this phase. But they actually wanted to stay. And their participation actually proved crucial. When the designers were designing this middle screen, they were struggling to come up with iconography that would really represent some of the diverse ideas that we were trying to get across. Like, this location has no water, or scary animals were sighted in this location. Maybe you shouldn't take your herd there. But we were able to rapidly iterate and show our designs to the users and get immediate feedback so that we were able to confirm which icons resonated and which ones didn't. So for user testing, it was important to solicit feedback from a larger and more diverse group than was just the Sprint team. If you'll remember, we had sprinters from Ethiopia and Tanzania, but we were in Kenya. So we were able to go about an hour south of Nairobi and test our prototype with a group of Maasai. And this proved extremely valuable as we saw the validity of this tool immediately. And that the approach we chose would transcend geographic and tribal boundaries. Now, the sprint process allowed us to find common ground, to share ideas, and develop a common language, and work together to fully understand the user needs from the very outset of the project. Next, we're going to talk about a case study that Sumier did here at Google.
Great. What an impactful sprint. So cool. All right, so I'm going to switch gears a bit, and I'm going to talk about the product that I work on, and that's Google Station. Now, just as a recap, Google Station is a product that's bringing high-quality public Wi-Fi to next billion user markets worldwide. Now, a little bit of a caveat. I can't really talk about the actual product that we were designing in the sprint, but I can talk about the process, and that's what I'm going to do here. So a while ago, someone on our team had this really cool idea. They wanted to bring in the features that are present in a different Google product into Google Station. We got super excited. We talked to this team, and that team got super excited. And we were all like ready to have this happen, but we didn't know how. So we didn't know what this experience would look like. So great reason to have a sprint. We also had never worked together as a team, so there was like no working relationship. Another great reason to have a sprint, to bring teams together so they can establish trust. Now, here's another challenge. The Google Station team is based largely in Mountain View. This other product is based in Asia. And at the time, the user that we were designing for was in India. So 3 different countries. Really challenging. And going back to the slide that Burgan showed earlier, we had an answer from the business side how this product would work. And we also knew that from an engineering standpoint, we could most likely make it work. But what we didn't know is this something that our users even care about? We didn't know if this was desirable for our users. So this big gap was something we needed to address. So we decided that we should run an immersive sprint. So the sprint challenge was design an experience aligned with user needs that would combine functionality of 2 products in a very seamless way. But before we could even talk about seamless and the interaction design and all of that, I really wanted us to figure out does this make sense for our users? So I flexed the standard 5-phase methodology of the sprint and added an extra phase, which is that orange circle you see here for strategy. We wanted to figure out, is there a strong user-focused product strategy for this product? And this was critical. We didn't know if this would work for our users. And this product strategy needed to come from actual user insights. We didn't know our user that well. So we added 2 more phases to the sprint. Before the sprint, we added research. After the sprint, we added research. Different kinds of research, though. Before the sprint, we added foundational research. And after the sprint, we were going to validate the design solutions we come up with research to validate it. So that was also in the field, but it was a different style of research. Now, this extended the duration of the sprint. And we invited all of our sprint participants to actually take part in the research. We thought this was really important because that would be an immersive experience for them. And it would lay the foundation for them to effectively participate in the sprint and come up with great design solutions. So this was also a lot of overhead in terms of planning, because that meant travel, going out into the field for a large group. So to recap, understand the user context, doing foundational research, use those user insights to drive the entire sprint, and then when you have design solutions as outcomes, take them back into the field to validate them with your users. So that was the process that we followed. So how did we do this research? For both the pre- and post-sprint research, we use a technique known as intercepts. Now, by intercepts, I mean going out into the field, finding a user, asking them if they can spend a few minutes with you, and then doing an interview. And you can do an interview and ask them about their habits and their lives and get a lot of foundational information about them. Or you can show them a prototype. And this could be like a clickable prototype. It could be a live product. It could be sketches on a piece of paper. And you can ask them to use this prototype to do certain tasks and observe how they do it. And this would be evaluative. So intercepts are really flexible in that sense. You can use them for different styles of research. And it's also in a user's natural environment. So instead of bringing a user to you and asking them to come to a lab, you're going out to a user. So you're putting them at ease. And paper prototypes are totally OK. So one of the things I really love about intercepts is that they're really scrappy. You can put them together in a really short time. And also, they're cross-functional. This gives your team, your non-user experience research and design team, your PMs, your engineers, to take part in research and actually come face-to-face with your users. It's amazing and eye-opening for them. This is why I love intercepts. So that was the research part. Now let's talk about that strategy piece. To figure out if we had a right user-focused product strategy, we'd use a technique known as value prop canvas. So based on those user insights, we asked users who were already using Google Station. We made a list of all the features in that product and what the pain points of users were using Google Station then. So we had all the user pains. Then we made a list of all the gains that users are seeing by using that product. So we knew the user gains. And then we went through the sprint. We went through a lot of sketching, we diverged, we voted on ideas, we converged, we came up with a few solutions. We did the same with those solutions. Are any of the features in the solution going to relieve the pains that users are facing? Are they going to boost the gains that users are seeing? If both of these boxes map, then you know what you're designing is great for your users. If they don't map, then you have a problem. You don't have a strong value proposition. And that's when you have to decide whether this even makes sense to move forward with. So this is what we used for exploring product strategy. All right, so what did I learn by running the sprint? First, the sequence of methods that you use in a sprint really matters. And if I hadn't taken the time to think about the sprint challenge and add a product strategy piece, we wouldn't have been successful. So think about the sequence of products, do a dry run, try to see if one method feeds into the other. Does the output of one method feed into the input of the other? If there's a gap, then address it. Make stakeholders your partners, especially when you're running a broad sprint like this. You want them to be your partners. You want them to agree with you, invest the time and money and resources. And you want to do daily check-ins with them. Tell them how you're doing. What did you do today? What did you achieve as a team? Get feedback. Work on it. I've never run a sprint that has always gone according to plan. So things go wrong. People have questions. They question the very premise of your sprint. Things take too long to run. Methods don't go as you plan. Logistical issues. So be nimble, be agile, be prepared to change things around on the fly. One of the great side benefits of a sprint is that you're bringing two teams together who have not worked together, and you're going to drive a lot of alignment between them and really strong working relationships between them. So no matter what happens, you're going to get that. And we got that. And then the last thing I wanted to leave you with for this case study is that this was a super successful sprint for us, not because we figured out this amazing new product that we wanted to launch. We actually learned that we did not have a strong value proposition with this new idea. This did not make sense for our users. At the end of the sprint, we decided we didn't want to move forward with this. So the fact that this sprint helped us understand very quickly if the time, effort, and resources required to build this was worth it makes it super powerful for us. So you might be thinking, I'm not going to Kenya and I'm not going to India. Why does any of this matter to me? Well, have you ever designed for users in regions different from where you live? I bet you have. Have you ever designed or developed solutions for users who are different from you? Kids, the elderly, minorities, people who are less tech savvy than you? I bet you have. And have you designed for use cases you aren't familiar with? Have you made a product for the automotive industry or made a fitness app and you've never been to the gym? We do this all the time. This is our job. Immersive sprints are perfect for these use cases. And why they're powerful is because you now have the opportunity to bring your team with you to learn. Instead of doing research in a silo and bringing a research report back, you can take them with you. This is where the power of sprints really shines through. They're cross-functional, they're participatory, and they're democratic. So now I'm going to present some tips to run your own immersive sprints with Burgan. So the very first one, I went over a little bit in advance. This is intercepts. Now, intercepts are a great research method. They're very scrappy and fast. They don't work well when you need to recreate a lab setting. So if you're doing an Internet of Things setup and you need hardware, you want to recreate a home, intercepts don't work well. But if you have an app, if you have paper prototypes, if you want to do foundational research and talk to users and just learn about them, intercepts are great. Now, it's important to know that if you go in a large group of 10 people trying to talk to one user, you're going to scare them off. So don't do that. Try to split up into smaller groups, and then split up and talk to people on your own. Come back, regroup, and share your notes. If you're doing international research, there's a couple of things to be aware of. Be aware of cultural nuances, how to talk to people, how to address them, dressing. So do some research beforehand. Get good interpreters or translators, because even if they speak the same language as you, there might be important nuances that you would miss. If it's possible, and if your user is OK with it, ask them beforehand if you can take a video. If they say yes, take a video of your interaction with them. Because when you take a video back to your team, it is super powerful, way more powerful than a research report can be. Paper prototypes and focus groups are OK for this. Because you're talking to so many users, you'll correct for that. And then watch out for selection bias. We have an idea in our head of who our user is. So there's like a bias to go and talk to users that you think would be likely users of your app. Don't do that. You're outside in the field. You have access to a diverse range of users. So go talk to everyone. And then one last tip. We try to make sure that we don't prime our users to give us answers that they think we'll want to hear. So we try not to tell them that, hey, I designed this, give me your feedback, because they'll be nice to you and they'll tell you this is amazing, even if they don't like it. So we try to save that information for after the interview.
Those are some great tips, and a lot of them will apply to co-design as well. Now, co-design is a fundamental change in the relationship between product creators and users. Traditionally, experts have gone out and observed, done interviews with mostly passive users. In co-design, users are deeply involved in the ideation and creation process. So you really want to prepare your users in advance. Let them know what to expect in the design sprint, talk about the different activities that they might go through, and help them reflect on their experiences that they normally perceive as routine. So perhaps you ask them to do a diary study beforehand, or have them talk to other members of their community to get a wider perspective. Logistics are also quite important. You're going to want to allow more time for each of the activities and more time to explain them as well. Do you need a translator? Similar to intercepts, it might be useful. Are you in the natural context of the experience, or are you asking the users to come into your space? What would make them more comfortable? What materials do you need to allow your users to fully express themselves and to take their ideas down? Are they comfortable with drawing? Would they be more comfortable if you gave them something to build with, different components that they could put together? Would they be interested in role-playing or storytelling? So really think through all of the contingencies and the schedule of your sprint. Now, facilitation is going to be key here, and you're going to be switching roles a little bit from translator of the user experience to facilitating the users and guiding them through the creative process. And finally, make sure you include a diverse and inclusive user set. And why do we do this? This sounds like a lot of work, so what are the benefits of co-design? You're really going to get an increased knowledge and empathy for the user for the full team, and that's key. You're going to have all your engineers, your PMs, face-to-face with the users. You're going to build better and more innovative ideas. You're going to have lots and lots of more and better ideas. Your decision-making is going to be more efficient, and your sprint participants are going to be more confident in the decisions that they make. And you're going to have immediate validation of concepts and ideas. Just as I discussed with the iconography in our app for AfriScout, we were able to immediately validate what worked and what didn't. And you'll be able to establish a deeper and long-term relationship with your users. Now, what if you can't bring users in for the full sprint? Maybe they have to work, they're not able to take that much time off to come in and participate in your sprint. We also often do something called extended user participation. So this is an alternative where we bring users in at key milestones within the sprint. So we'll recruit users to do check-ins at critical milestones or at the end of each phase. We'll do cognitive walkthroughs. We'll let them look at sketches. We'll just show them what we've been working on and get their feedback. You might have to pivot, but you'll want to plan time to act on the feedback that they give you. Now, what if you just can't bring your users to you at all and you can't go to them? What do we do then?
So that's when remote sprinting comes in. And we'll be honest with you, this has not been very successful, and we don't highly recommend it, but sometimes it's unavoidable. Your users are far away, you can't go to them, so you can use things like slides or docs to collaborate remotely. You can use Google Forms and send out a survey and get your users to take a survey to get insights. One of the things that we've done, especially when you're doing research from many time zones away, is overnight research. So an example was we were doing a sprint here for a product that was based in Indonesia. So we did a lot of work all day, packaged it up, sent it over there. Researcher ran research for us overnight, and we had feedback waiting for us the next morning. So that was great. Obviously, this is very situation specific. So if you can't do this, you might want to consider taking a break. And instead of doing all 5 days of a sprint in one go, do 2 days at a time, break off to some research, come back, and then regroup the next week. So these are some techniques for doing remote sprinting. All right, so to recap, we talked about intercepts, we talked about co-design, talked about extended user participation, and remote sprinting. With that, we hope that we've shown you the value of immersive design sprints and given you the right tools to run your own successful immersive sprint. Now, we'd love to hear from you, so please provide feedback for this session by signing in on google.com/io/schedule. And if you want more helpful resources about design sprints, go to designsprint.kit.withgoogle.com. That's it from us. Thank you.
Thank you.